Several days ago, I ended up catching up on my overlooked games with my 2019 list. If you haven't seen it, I'd check it out over here. But you knew that if a 2019 list was done, you could probably expect a 2020 list as well. And in this year of absolute chaos, the indie scene produced a lot of games that would be worth the title of overlooked. Regardless, the same rules apply to this list as my 2019 list. Under 2,000 user reviews on Steam, and a general idea that they didn't sell as well as they should have, or the equivalent of those requirements. Again, not every game's on Steam. Alright, enough talk and enough of these intros. Here are the top overlooked games, the top 15 in particular, games of 2020. Number 15. Evergate. Evergate is sadly going to be a game that is going to be overlooked by a majority of people. It gives off the impression that it's similar to Ori and the Blind Forest from a visual standpoint, and yet it's a small indie platformer that does not have that extra oomph that forces you to look at it. Yet if you actually dig into the game, you'll find a fresh take on the platforming puzzle genre that forces you to keep on thinking creatively while still forcing you to have a semi-precision in order to execute your puzzle's plan. Needless to say, there's not a long wrong here on the surface, and my first hours of the game was basically me having fun on stream while really appreciating the eye for game design. Dividing levels into 3 objectives that don't run concurrently all the time was smart, to force replayability but to allow for experimentation with the actual path that you're going to travel. And there's enough leeway in most of these elements in order to scoot by even when a plan falls apart on the first attempt. The presentation may be similar to other games in terms of its style, but it's definitely its own thing, and I really was surprised with the level of detail in the environments. It's the type of puzzle game that's good for an evening or two of brain-busting fun, but doesn't push you too far and lets you enjoy the experience. Pick it up when you've got the chance. Number 14. Paradise Killer. Yeah, you probably thought that this game was going to be much higher on this list. And truth be told, based on my criteria, it really shouldn't be on the list altogether right now. I mean, it ended up in the 2,000 to 500,000 numbers when this video was released based on Steam Spy, and that should cross it off the list. But when I started the list about 3 weeks ago, the game did fall under the requirements, being in 100,000 to 200,000, and I'm only mentioning all of this right now because some idiot named Dragnix was deleting items off his main C drive and accidentally forced himself to redo all the audio of this video because he's a frickin' idiot. But because I have to at some point lock in these lists, I can only spend so much time on these, Paradise Killer does earn its spot. Granted, its placement on the list is low, not because it's known, but because, well, I didn't actually love it as much as my colleagues did, but still enjoyed it a bunch. It's all about the characters here, about the unique setting that paints a group of people trying to make the perfect world and having to restart over and over again, and how each character has a motive for the crime that takes place and actually have it make sense. Lady Love Dies takes the role of starring character rather nicely, and I would like to see her be in more games. And the aesthetic alone sets the tone for a psychedelic yet dreamy experience. I want to know more about the backstabbing ways of certain characters, how some will protect others through nefarious means, and the real truth behind the paradise that it's tempting to be built is something that I really love. What I don't love is the actual investigation portion. Yeah, I understand I'm supposed to feel like a detective, I'm supposed to do the legwork. It's just that this game's navigation in terms of trying to get from one place to another, it just was not for me, and I will admit that openly. It just was a struggle to get to where I wanted to go, and I understand that there are checkpoints and places that I could, travel to, but I wanted to get to the core of the story, and the game kept on getting in my way. Nevertheless, Paradise Killer is worth your time if you love detective games like Apollo Justice, Phoenix Wright, and Danganronpa. I just don't think it's on the level of some of those other games, but frankly, if the story really resonates with you, it may actually be. Number 13. Lithium City. In the big picture, does Lithium City do anything that will stick with you for years to come and help define new life and features in the isometric systematic elimination genre? No, it won't. But here's the hint. Not every game needs to do that in order to be worth your time. And the short yet very contained experience of Lithium City delivers high quality in a little under 2 hours. Going through each enemy as you shoot one enemy, bash another, and then attempt to avoid a deadly hit is a great rush that keeps up the tension without having big lulls in the action. The game also mixes up the formula up wisely, with puzzles to slow down things just a tad, but keeps a fantastic pace that will keep you pushing through it. Difficulty is that right mix of pushing the player without feeling like you're bashing your head against the wall here. And it's all done in the backdrop of a futuristic city that removes certain details to help the limited storyline out, but it's there to emphasize the action on screen. It's what drew me to the game in the big picture. It's a visual treat that takes advantage of the future cyberpunk-like setting. Music sets the tone well without overshadowing the gameplay, along with limited sound design that gives you the information you need to best succeed in the levels. The game also has a way of delivering childlike wonder at times, with simple things like the shattering of enemies that never got old. Yes, many of you may scoff at an $8 title for 2 hours of gameplay, but the game also does have a speedrun-like quality to it, and smacking people over and over again never gets old. Number 12. Timelie. Puzzle games always exist in this weird space, where it always feels like they are seemingly overlooked when it comes to the discussions of best games of the year. See something like Baba Is You. But it seems like everyone and their mother has played at least a puzzle game every now and again and enjoyed it. With that said, introducing a time-altering mechanic into a puzzle game and making it the core of how to solve the puzzles is something that Timelie did exceptionally well while having a pretty presentation to boot. Timelie is a puzzle game that gives you slight leeway in how you go about your solutions, but not enough where the game is unstructured. Optional objectives to pick up extra collectibles help this, and the general strategy elements at play here put your noggin into different scenarios that it may not have considered before. To be frank, this puzzle game felt a lot different from the majority I've played the last few years, and that's saying something considering all the indies I stream over at Twitch at a weekly basis, and hopefully back here soon as well, as soon as a certain copyright strike is dealt with. But investment into our main female protagonist and her kitty friend as they attempt to sneak by is the majority of the story at play here, and you'll feel like a father trying to guide your young child through a series of impossible obstacles. It's cute, but don't let the cuteness overshadow a solid puzzle game underneath the surface here, or you'll sort of regret it. Number 11. Murder House. Taking a step back into the days of Silent Hill and Clock Tower, Murder House may not live up entirely to those legacies in terms of length and action, but when it comes to the feeling that those games gave, Murder House feels like a spiritual successor to them in more ways than one. It's a 3 to 4 hour story that has you taking a group of reporters to investigate the house of the notorious Easter Ripper. The game eases you in, trying to get under your skin with things like a limited save system and tank controls. But it's all to set up the tension when you're trying to find a place to hide from the Ripper, as you hide or blast him in the face with a gun that you found. The presentation screams PS1 era all over the place, down to the set of options with things like film grain and audio distortion effects. Now look, it's counting on the nostalgia of those games to sell its experience, but frankly, it does that well. It also gets the cheese of the 80s slasher genre just right, not feeling too comedic, but also having a sense of humor that, yeah, could be morbid to some, but just right for others. Yes, you won't buy the game for the kills or the jump scares, but for the tension it creates. And really, I feel that's what horror is all about. Number 10. AppSir. Dragnix, I hear you saying, you're cheating, putting 2 games on the list in one spot. In fact, what is AppSir anyway? Well, it's the company behind Hopbound and Puzzling Peaks.exe, and I'm making an exception here because the game is done by the same developer, AppSir. And that may draw your next question. How did a small studio publish 2 games worthy of this list in 1 year? Simple. They are shorter games that cost under $4. But don't let the short play time or the price deter you from picking them up, whether it be on Steam, iOS, or Android. Because a short contained experience can deliver as well as a long-tailing epic if you choose to allow it to. Hopbound's platforming precision goes a long way with an uneasy atmosphere and a good story that allows subtle elements to create a tension of unease while allowing the precision platforming to be rather effective. It's got a great pace that doesn't linger on any one element for too long, but lets you reflect on the game's lessons about life and what is important. The game feels rooted in real experiences, and thus, you'll get a tear or two rolling down your cheek by the end and the roll credits. Meanwhile, Puzzling Peaks.exe is a smartly designed physics-based puzzler that can lead to hilarious moments of luck being involved, but also makes you think about how best to manipulate the world to move the hero just enough to get to that portal. The puzzles are paced well again with good variety that doesn't stick on any element too long, and the game does get you with a nice scare every now and again. Quite frankly, the games are well worth their price tag and show that small games can deliver the spotlight just as much as big games can. You just gotta give them a chance to. Number 9. At Dead of Night. Unfortunately, there's a stigma about games that use FMV type mechanics for some reason, despite the fact that there have been plenty of solid games that use the mechanic, especially in the horror genre. The realism that FMVs can provide at times can add an additional oomph in terms of getting under a player's skin, and that's exactly the case with the recent release At Dead of Night. Having the psychopath Jimmy stalk you around the hotel as you try to get into contact with its ghost has the strong influence of your typical cat and mouse horror scenario, but solid sound design and informational clues will help those paying attention be able to avoid Jimmy bonking them in the head around a hallway corner. Tension is the name of the game here, and At Dead of Night delivers in that particular aspect rather spectacularly. But don't overlook the story either. The small character tales of ghosts who have dealt with Jimmy in the past and how their lives were affected is captivating and heartbreaking in many ways. And the voice acting is able to reasonably sell moments without being too over the top. The overall design of the hotel tells a story in of itself with its unlit rooms and labyrinth hallways, causing even more confusion and panic in the process. It's a spooky game with a good story that highlights tension more than most games in the genre, and is still able to scare you with a good earned jump scare. It's criminally overlooked right now, so give it a try if you're feeling in the mood. Number 8. Ring of Pain. You know what's a good indicator of a well-designed card-based roguelike game? The one more run mentality. Slay the Spire has it, Grifflands has it, and while you probably heard of the first two, you probably haven't heard of Ring of Pain. Although the visuals may off-put some, the game has a real life about it, with its strange creature design and interesting atmosphere. But the core experience of 4 stats that determine how you play, an equipment system that leads to a variety of different builds and strategies, and the simplicity of the movement and stealth system leads to the game where I just want to keep trying to make my way to the end and escape. Enemies pose unique challenges, whether it be a spitter that fires away from you slowly but surely, or an explosive creature running after you and is ready to explode in your face, killing you. Thinking a few steps ahead in how to minimize your damage here is always something you need to be mindful of, but there's also runs where you can just sort of let shit hit the fan and just sort of turn off your brain with defensive or glass cannon type runs. And yeah, sure, you're gonna die here and there, but this is a roguelike, and a card-based roguelike at that. That was going to happen anyway. Ring of Pain is a perfect companion piece to putting on a bunch of videos in the background of your favorite YouTube reviewer, playing here and there while listening to them stream the latest indie game. Just like myself. This is where I say subscribe and all that jazz, right? Be a sellout because it's the most effective for getting people to follow, right? I'm supposed to say people go follow me on Twitch, right? My desperate pleading aside, Ring of Pain is a perfect game to just lose hours with. And in this day and age, we could actually really use more of that. Number 7. Fae Tactics. Look, I could just say it's like Final Fantasy Tactics with a good story, and frankly, a lot of you would just rush out to buy Fae Tactics. And I mentioned in the 2019 Overlooked Games video that making comparisons like that has been a pandemic in of itself on the games industry. But yeah, I get the comparisons to Final Fantasy Tactics. A bunch of good characters, very smart strategy and isometric strategy design, and yeah, some interesting characters that feel very Final Fantasy-esque. But the focus on constructing a party of particular styles that complement each other, combined with the positional gameplay that has worthy skills usable when waiting, to the point that yes, it does sometimes make sense to wait to attack, will put any tactics player to the test here, but not scare off those who are a little new to the genre. There's a lot of different builds you can go for each character, having stats and equipable scrolls, meaning that replayability is high and you can really mold characters into what you want them to be. It helps that many of the characters here are some that you will fall in love with thanks to a lot of good characterization, and actually will care about if they go down, even if there's no perma-loss. Quite frankly, it's possibly the one game on this list that could have changed its position more if I had more time with it, and with the amount of games that I play nowadays, that just doesn't happen at times. But the fact that it got to number 7 on this list should tell you something of what I played of it. It was great of what I played, and enough where I wanted to go back to it. And in this day and age, strategy games like this don't necessarily get the spotlight. So give Fae Tactics a try. Honorable mention: 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. This is the point of the list where people sort of are taken aback and say, wait a minute, Dragnix, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is probably the overlooked game of the year. And to a certain extent, I do agree with you. The fact that the game didn't win the best story at the Game Awards, yeah, we knew that was going to happen, but the fact that the game hasn't sold better than it has from the studio that brought us Dragon's Crown and Odin's Sphere has been very, very depressing. And you're probably wondering, why is it on the list as an honorable mention? The fact of the matter is that it is overlooked. And here's where I have to be a little bit upfront with you. Yes, I do think the game is overlooked, but when I went and looked at numbers, The PS4 and PS5, I can't exactly get numbers easily, and especially user reviews, because we all know the user reviews on PS4 and PS5 and consoles in general aren't exactly quality. But with the game selling 150,000 copies, that's where things got a little bit iffy for me. Yeah, it did sell at least enough where it would normally push it outside of the range of my list, and without the ability to see Steam reviews, quote unquote, and this being a PC-focused channel, I went back and forth on whether or not to include 13 Sentinels on this list. The fact is, it probably would be fighting for number 1 or number 2 on the list if it was included. But rather than go through that exercise, I decided to keep it as an honorable mention. Please, play the game. The strategy elements are pretty fantastic with the mech-type combat here, and frankly, the characters in this game are ones that you will attach yourselves to, and you will get really concerned if they are in danger on the battlefield. The story and characterization as a whole is something that the industry could learn a lot of, especially in the Fire Emblem type genre. Yes, I know, it's not Fire Emblem, but you know what I mean, the strategy type genre. Look, 13 Sentinels deserves a lot better than it's gotten. And yes, a lot of people will put it on their overlooked list. And technically I have too. It's just not in an official capacity. So consider this an extra one for this list. I'm not cheating. Number 6. Atomicrops. Atomicrops is one of those games that is the definition of a solid purchase. You're not going to feel bad about the $15 spent here in any case, as you will get a fun return on investment, something that you'll play for hours at a time. I mean, I do have over 100 hours in the game. I know I left the game on sometimes, but still over 100 hours. Will the game be something that revolutionizes the genre, or will stick with you 10 to 15 years down the road? Not right now, no. I do believe that's possible with some tweaks here and there, but it's a game that has a couple of yeah buts about it that won't put it in the elite. But that definitely doesn't mean it's not worth the money. It's the combination of mechanics here that really shine, as the basic but not too complicated shooting turning into resource gathering, turning into a chaotic version of Harvest Moon and Rune Factory, all combines into a roguelike game that succeeds in each phase of its gameplay. Guns are fun to use and do have reasonable strategies, and little additions like the combination of crops for 2x2 mega crops add a layer of skill for those looking to maximize their runs. Chaos is the name of the game here, as some additions of the time mechanic and limited space to build your plots can punish bad choices, but also puts you under pressure to actually do things. The difficulty scales in years reasonably without feeling like adding just bullet sponges, and the AI is competent. A lot of my complaints about the game are little ones, but don't drag the overall experience down. Overall, it's a solid game that can really help you pass the time while being stuck at home due to COVID. And it can take hours upon hours upon hours to finally beat the game. And really, that's what you want from a roguelike like this. Number 5. Necrobarista. While I wouldn't put Necrobarista in the top tier of visual novels such as Enigma and Valhalla, it's not too far off the mark in all honesty. Being a solid story in the genre that has a unique presentation that stands out from the rest, Necrobarista centers around Maddie, a barista at a mysterious coffee shop that acts as a gateway between the living and the world of the dead. The back and forth she has with other characters use their quirks and personalities wisely to contrast her own, while moving forward the plot with every sub-conversation, even those that aren't directly involved in the main conflict. That's thanks to clever and layered writing and a good timely use of jokes that hit more than they miss. It never undersells the emotions of moments while doing that either, and it's enhanced by the game's unique presentation that isn't just a paint job. It uses word placement and timing to sell the emotions of scenes, enhancing the text and giving them a point rather than just words to read on the screen. Music cuts in and out like sound stings to help the visuals as well. And the creators of Necrobarista definitely understand the concept of conveyance more than several of their counterparts. Let me put it this way. You definitely will be wondering why more visual novels don't go this out there with their presentation after playing Necrobarista. It's a great story about dealing with loss and how to cope, which is something that every person will need in their lives at some point. Consider giving this one a try. You'll be glad you did. Number 4. Wildfire. From a critical and colleague perspective, I'm actually surprised this game wasn't as well received as I first thought it was when I first researched for this list. I thought it would be a key number 1 or 2 contender for a lot of people out there, but some of them didn't like the game as much as I did. And maybe that has something to do with me not necessarily being the biggest fan of stealth gameplay in most cases, and yet for Wildfire, something clicked for me in terms of enjoying it. Waiting in the bushes and trying to figure out exactly what was going on, how to best go about my path, was really fun here, and it wasn't too slow or frustrating to play. The first few hours teaching me a good amount of skills that I could be creative with really helped that, and I really felt like I was up for the challenge at every point and willing to face it. Distracting enemies, setting bushes on fire, and scaring them off was fun, and the skills and abilities that you could get didn't feel overpowered, yet felt reasonable when attempting to figure out what I should put my skill points into. It helped that those powers were fueled by optional objectives like not announcing your presence, for example, so it gave you real reason to go after them. And the AI wasn't entirely stupid, but was also exploitable in certain ways. That right balance of not making me want to hit my head against the wall, but also giving me a challenge that I felt like I could actually do. The story isn't necessarily the best for games like this, but it actually does a lot better than a lot of games in the stealth genre do. And the presentation is probably the weakest, but that's not saying much. Yeah, the pixel people, they don't have any faces, blah blah blah. But the animation, and in particular some of the particle animation, like the fire, really does bring the game to a different level when it comes to enjoying what you've just done. I will say this, of all the games on this list, I would get opinions from other gamers out there that you may know and may have played this game and try to make a determination whether it's right for you, or take advantage of Steam's refund policy. Because yeah, I may be off the base with this in terms of what a player who likes stealth gameplay will enjoy here. But frankly, it did do elements of stealth rather nicely, and it just clicked for me in this case. And frankly, a game that can do that for someone as seasoned as me, yeah, it deserves a spot high on the list. Number 3. Jetlancer. Even with me always jumping up and down about how many games get overlooked, a good amount of the time, I can understand why they don't get the numbers that I think they should. I understand why a Zanki Zero with its crazy plot and dungeon crawling genre may not appeal to a mass audience. I get why people may not give Virgo vs. the Zodiac a chance with its pixel art style, its mostly female cast, and the focus on RPG mechanics. But even I sit here and look at Jetlancer being on this list, and I'm just sort of puzzled. Action-infused trailer, focus on aerial combat that looks really fun, which is a genre that a lot of people really want more of, great word of mouth by both traditional publications and YouTubers. Wait, how did this not sell more? Is it just the art style itself? But Luftraisers. I can only hope the game gets the same donkey effect like Zero Ranger did get a few years ago. Because when it comes to feeling in a dogfight, Jet Lancer not only succeeds, it engulfs you. Flying around trying to dodge enemy fire while throwing your missiles and bullets is thrilling, and the comparisons to Luftrazer seem to be apt, even though you know I didn't play that game. Its polished movement is something you will have to get used to, and the game doesn't hold your hand entirely with it. But with a fantastic soundtrack beating in the background, you'll be turning on a dime and shooting down enemy dogfires with the best of them. It's probably the most intense game I played this year, and while the graphics may not look a lot on the surface, it shines in the animation department, and it proves that when used correctly, pixel art styles can capture the feeling with the best of games, and frankly, it gives you all the information you need. The story is also nothing to shake a stick at either. There are some cool characters in here, and yeah, some stereotypes, but it uses a lot of the genre tropes rather nicely, and it pays homage to things like Godzilla and, 80s and 90s TV shows in certain cases. So yeah, Jet Lancer is a game that really should have sold more in many different ways, but if you like action, Jet Lancer is something that you should have bought 3 seconds ago, even though you didn't know about it. How about you just go buy it now and play it? Number 2. Star Renegades. Star Renegades legitimately gave me problems when writing its Steam review, because I usually like to include a list of positive and negative features for whatever I look at. For Star Renegades, I couldn't really seem to find a lot to put in the negative column, which is definitely a testament for how polished of an experience it is. The systems will feel familiar from other games in parallel genres of strategy, roguelikes, and tactic-type games, but where Star Renegades succeeds is using all those systems, altering them slightly to work together in synergy without one feeling too overpowered or central over the other. The combat system relying on breaking the opponent in first attacks, while still putting a lot of emphasis on health, armor, and strategy, is the shining star of the game here, as even the smallest of battles will make you pay attention to minimize health and armor risk without feeling like the game is being overly difficult. Don't get me wrong though, the game can punish big mistakes, and you will need a few runs under your belt before you really think that you can actually complete a run. But the roguelite system present feels like it helps you just enough on consecutive runs without feeling like it's pulling down the difficulty too much in the aspect of it. Character combinations and the affection system work well to reward smart camping, and paying attention to the Nemesis system and how you can set yourself up for success with the rewards will make you feel like a genius when the plan comes together. But surprisingly, it's the striking presentation and relying on animation and key elements to latch on in the visuals that will make you discard the, oh, it's just another pixel art game in the roguelike genre, and actually embrace Star Renegades. Character portraits have life to them, and make them feel in that cartoony yet realistic valley. And combat animations have weight with smart sound design and reasonable death animations that emphasize the action at hand. Don't overlook the typical sci-fi story here either. Its use of genre tropes and jokes make you pay attention to it while making you care about the characters that you're actually trying to protect. Look, it's very easy for a game like this to get overlooked in this year, because there's a roguelike that evs everyone, including myself, falling in love with it in Hades. And the fact is, you might have overlooked Star Renegades, and that would be a deadly, deadly mistake. Play Hades, of course, but also pick up Star Renegades, or, just go to the Xbox One Game Pass, because it's there too. Or pick it up on Steam if you don't want to take care of that value. You probably want that value, right? Okay, I'm just sort of mumbling. Play Star Renegades, for God's sake. Number 1. Slasher's Keep. There was a time where I didn't even consider Slasher's Keep for this list. I thought, surely this game has the sales. It was covered by Northern Lion, for God's sakes. Then I actually checked the game's stats, and sure enough, it only had 1,000 or so reviews at the time I started writing this list. Well, that shot it towards the top of my list, and the top 3 games battled for the top spot at each point. But in the end, Slasher's Keep was the one that took number 1, mostly because it was the game I played the most of and kept coming back to, despite me playing the other games as well. Slasher's Keep roguelike dungeon crawler elements in the first person is just good old-fashioned fun, but definitely stands out compared to others in the genre. It fully embraces the roguelite part of it, as each run you gain stats and levels, and you only lose a part of them and some skills when you die. But there's a lot of elements that are centered around that restarting mechanic, in particular with the ability to send gear down to the start of a dungeon for your adventurer to start with it on their next run. It leads to fascinating decisions of what to permanently learn, what to keep, and whether or not to push forward or not when you have a certain weapon in your hands that could be very useful, but you may want to save it for the next run. However, this wouldn't work without the core combat system, which is fantastic. It focused primarily on melee combat, but it's a simple yet complex system. For example, blocking will only work if it gets in the right range and angle for the weapon enemies are attempting to slice you with. Now that may sound dumb at first, considering that's the whole point of a first-person melee combat-focused game, but it's the accuracy here that I'm referring to. There's no give in terms of blocking at the wrong angle. Either it's the wrong angle or not, and it feels very realistic in the dueling when going back and forth with an orc, throwing your sword, attempting to block, and trying to avoid that lethal damage. Weapons have definite differences to them in weight that lead to different playstyles, whether it be slashing quickly for small damage, or using a mace to smash a skull to dust. The gear leveling system makes sure that you make a little bit of progress here and there, and that you have less problems on earlier floors with your gear, but you're then able to run into a floor with creatures more powerful than you, and you're scrambling to replace the gear that you will be swearing by for the past few floors. Sure, the AI has a weird element to them here and there, but they cause enough of a challenge that you'll be regularly drinking those health potions like a man trapped in the Sahara Desert if you're really not careful. What finally puts Slasher's Keep over the top are some of the ridiculous skills the game has. Like, yeah, I know, I've had a warrior that sucks the life with each hit out of my opponent in other games before, but how about a skill where if you cut off the enemy's head with a timely slice, that their head turns into an explosive bomb that can damage other enemies? Like beheading bombs? How can this game not be towards the top of this list with something like that? It's also all done with a very stylized yet fantastically detailed presentation, and little things like seeing orc pinup posters on the wall help give these enemies life and this world life, even if most of the story is in transitional writing between levels. This is definitely not a story person's type of game, but there is enough environmental storytelling to make me think, oh, I wonder what happened in this dungeon here. Slasher's Keep is a must-buy in the roguelite dungeon crawling genre, and hell, I'm still playing it even while trying to cover so many other games. That should be a testament to how addictive it is and why it's number 1 on this list. And that's it for my 2020 Overlooked Games of the Year list. Now, unlike the 2019 list, I will indicate that my 2020 list did not have my Game of the Year. And while I don't do those Game of the Year lists anymore because, well, I'd rather focus on the Overlooked games, I will give it here. It's Hades. It's not The Last of Us 2. It'll never be The Last of Us 2. But Hades was just a bunch of fun, and I really enjoy it, and you should play that game. But that's not what this list is for. It's for the games that you haven't heard of. Now, like with my 2019 list, I want to know if there's a game in 2020 that you think is overlooked, and put it in the comments section below. Again, when I make these lists, I only have a certain amount of time to go through them, and while I'm willing to spend a bunch to try to find the games that people have overlooked, the fact is, I won't be able to hit all of them. So leave it in the comments section below. And if you want more content like this, well, this happens a couple times a year. I mean, this is a work of throughout the year of all the streaming I do and all the indie games that I cover. So if you want it on a more regular basis, subscribe here and go follow me over on Twitch. And the fact is, if you want to see more content like this, you know, maybe give me a shout out here and there. But regardless, this is Dragnix signing out. And as always, whether it be 2019, 2020, or 2021, keep on gaming.